Try this. Describe yourself without using your job title, your company name, or your seniority. Just who you are. Now, if you paused even for a second, that tells you something, because it probably means that your identity has become so wrapped up in what you do for work that you just can't separate the two. And that creates a problem that most people never realize, because when your identity is so tied up in your current role, it acts like blinkers on you. You can only see opportunities that look like what you're doing already, and you can only imagine the next version of the job that you've already got. So if you feel like something needs to change, but you can't work out what, that's because your sense of who you are is keeping your field of vision too narrow. It limits what you think you could do, and it also limits how far you think you could go. And the longer it goes on, the more trapped you feel, without ever really understanding why. So in this video, I'm going to help you. I'm going to show you why this happens and the 3 easy things that you can do to kind of untangle your identity from your job role so that you can work out what you should actually do next. Now, most of us don't intentionally decide one day to tie our sense of who we are to our job. It happens much more slowly than that. And if you think about it, you're introduced by your job title. You're obviously rewarded for what you do at work. And you'll most likely be surrounded by people who reinforce that identity for you, both in and outside of work. And over the years, what you do for work defines more and more about who you are. So perhaps you stay in a role that you don't really like, or you turn down opportunities that would stretch you because they don't fit the story you're telling yourself about who you are. Or you scroll past job descriptions and think, that's not me, within 3 seconds, without ever really thinking about whether you could actually do it and enjoy it. And the thing that makes this situation so hard to get out of is that you think you know what you're good at, what you're suited to, and what any next logical step would be for you. But that focus is actually your identity filtering out everything that doesn't match that version of you. So you might notice this in small ways. Maybe you're introduced to somebody and they ask you what you do, and you don't like having to answer that, or the conversation kind of just stops. Or maybe you notice it when someone moves to a role that you think is quite different to what they were doing before, and you feel a sense of jealousy, but also a bit of confusion. Jealousy because you'd like to do something a bit different, and confusion because you can't see how that's going to work for them, or how they've made that step, and you can't see yourself making a move like that. And the reason you can't see it is because your identity won't let you. I know this because I've lived it myself. I spent 22 years at KPMG, one of the world's largest professional services firms, and I was a client-facing partner, and I was also the COO and the head of people for a large part of the firm. And towards the end of my time there, I spent about 2 years knowing that I wanted to do something different before I actually did anything about it. I had some ideas, I had some financial runway, but I couldn't actually see a version of myself that wasn't a KPMG partner. That was an identity that I'd been building for 22 years, and it really narrowed my vision so much that every time I tried to imagine what else I could do, I kind of drew a blank. The blinkers were definitely on for me, but I didn't realize that's what it was. And I've now coached hundreds of senior leaders, and I run workshops on high performance inside big companies. And the pattern is always the same. The thing that holds most people back is that their identity has narrowed their field of vision to the point where they can only see one path forward. So I'm going to walk you through the 3 easy practices that will help you to take the blinkers off. The first one is going to make you see who you are more clearly. The second one is going to give you an identity that's not based on your role. And the third one is going to widen your field of vision so that you can start to see opportunities that you're probably just blind to right now. So let's get into it. Practice 1, separating the role from the person. And it goes back to that question from the start of the video. So if you couldn't use your job title, how would you describe yourself? Most people find this quite hard because they've spent years being rewarded for who they are in a professional context. You ask someone, what do you do? And they answer instantly. You ask, who are you? Without that, and there's that pause. And if you can't describe yourself without your job, you're going to find it really hard to imagine a future doing something else. So here's an exercise that helps. Strip everything away, company, title, industry, and try to describe what you're naturally good at, the problems you're good at solving, and the impact that you tend to have on other people around you. So instead of, I'm a partner at a Big 4 firm, it might be something like, I help people make better decisions under pressure, or I build teams that deliver complex work on time, or I tend to see the risk in a situation before anyone else does. They don't depend on a particular company or a job title, and once you've identified them, something interesting is going to happen for you. You will start to see how your skills could apply in contexts that you've never really considered before, because the blinkers start to lift a bit. You stop thinking, I'm a CFO at an insurance company, and start thinking, I'm someone who's brilliant at all these types of things compared to most people. And those things probably exist in a lot more places than you've been looking at. I experienced this myself when I was trying to work out what to do for myself. So for months, I could only see variations on what I'd already done. Perhaps that was moving into a people consulting role, or maybe a more senior leadership position within the firm. Maybe it was moving externally to a CFO role somewhere. And it wasn't until I forced myself to describe what I actually did well and those things that I enjoyed, without using any of the language that related to my specific role, that I could see executive coaching and professional development as a real option for me. It'd been there the whole time, but my identity had just been blocking the view. So if you want to try this now, pause the video and write down one sentence that describes what you bring without mentioning your title, your company, or your industry. That sentence is going to be the start of taking the blinkers off for you. Even when people do that exercise in practice 1, they often still feel anchored to where they are. And that's because there's a deeper layer underneath. The second practice is all about where you anchor your identity. And this is where it can get a bit uncomfortable, because most of us have built our sense of who we are on outcomes. It could be the promotion, bonus, the recognition that we get at work. And those outcomes are always tied to a specific role in a specific company, which means that your identity ends up so closely attached to the place that gave you those outcomes. The thing that helps here is to anchor your identity in your character strengths instead, things that don't depend on where you work or what your job title is. So I'll give you an example from my own experience. There was a moment, probably about 2 years before I left KPMG, where I was coaching a CFO at a client through a difficult leadership decision. It was one of those proper conversations where someone's thinking out loud and you can kind of see the shift happening in their brain in real time. And when that conversation finished, I walked out of the room and I thought, that's it. That's the sort of work that I should be doing every day. And then when I got back to my desk and I looked at my calendar for the rest of the week, it was full of back-to-back meetings, file reviews, and internal politics. And the thing that had just given me more energy than anything else that week was maybe like 5% of my actual role. The things that I valued doing, like that coaching conversation with the CFO, weren't what my role required of me. And once I could see that clearly, once I could name those things, the blinkers started to come off. Because I stopped asking what's the right next step for a KPMG partner and started asking, where can I do the work that really aligns with who I actually am? And those are obviously completely different questions. And the second one opens up a much wider field of vision. So here's what I suggest you try. Write down 3 things that give you energy at work, the sort of things that you're good at and that you look forward to doing. Not the outcomes like the promotion or the bonus, but the actual activities. These are the moments in your week where you think, yes, this is what I should be doing more of. Because once you can name those, you've got a filter that will make you see other opportunities that your current identity has been hiding from you. You can describe who you are without your title, and you've got a clearer sense of the work that you should be doing. But there's one more thing that keeps the blinkers on, and most people don't see it coming until something breaks. So this third practice is all about diversifying your identity. Because when your entire sense of self sits in one place, your career, you can only see the world through that one lens. And that's the final reason the blinkers stay on. If most of your identity is career related, then most of your thinking about the future is going to be career shaped. You can only imagine career shaped solutions to career shaped problems. And it becomes really hard to see a future that involves moving into a different field, building something of your own, or maybe restructuring your life around different priorities, because your identity isn't broad enough to see those other things. Most of the senior leaders I work with are massively overinvested in that one dimension of their career, so that when work is going well, life feels good. But when work has a bit of a wobble, everything wobbles. And that fragility is a part of what keeps people stuck, because the cost of making any kind of move feels enormous when your career is the only thing holding your identity together. So here's an exercise that can really help with this. Take a piece of paper and draw a simple pie chart and divide it up honestly. How much of it sits in your relationships? How much in your health, in your other interests, or in your community? For most people, career takes up about 80%, sometimes more, and everything else gets whatever's left. Now, you obviously don't want to be most people. So the second thing to do is to draw a second pie chart and fill out where you'd like each of those areas to be. And the gap between those two charts tells you where to focus. And here's why this matters for the blinkers. When you invest more of your identity outside of your career, 2 things happen. First, the stakes of any single career decision drop because your career becomes a broader part of the picture rather than the whole picture. And second, and this is the bit that surprises people, you actually start seeing career possibilities that you just couldn't see before. Because a broader identity gives you a broader lens. So the person who's invested in their health, their relationships, their other interests, and their career, they see more options than the person who's only invested in their career. The blinkers come off when your identity gets wider. Now, you might be thinking, I've been this way for 20 years, that's just who I am, and that's fair. Right? This isn't a quick fix, this is a practice, or a series of practices. But what I've seen consistently is that the moment people start doing these things, even in small ways, the blinkers start to lift. They see things that they genuinely couldn't see before, and that's really exciting for them. Or maybe you're thinking, if I loosen my grip on my professional identity, won't I lose my edge? And in my experience, you won't. What you will lose is some of the fear of making a change. And when that fear drops, you can actually see more clearly and you can make better decisions more easily and with more confidence. The people who I've worked with who have done this were always ambitious, but they become way more intentional about where they're now pointing that ambition. And if you're seriously considering changing something for yourself, there will be a phase where your old identity is gone. And if you haven't fully formed your new one yet, it's going to feel a bit like you're in free fall. Whereas if you have done this work, it'll feel much more like freedom. I know because I've been through it. So if any of this resonated with you, if there's even a small part of you thinking, I don't actually know who I am without my role, don't ignore that, because that question won't go away. And if you want some help, click the link in the description. I've got something that will make this much easier for you. And if you want to go deeper on this right now, the next video to watch is this one, where I show you the exact method I use with clients to find the work that actually fits who they've become. Because once the blinkers come off, you need a way to evaluate what you're actually now seeing. That's what this video gives you. But take a quick look at the link in the description first.